We originally intended to study the church history under 4 sections. The first section we almost finishing today. That is the early years of the church history. Last week we talked about the time when the church was consolidating its doctrinal positions through the councils. 4 councils we mentioned: the Council of Nicaea 325, and Council of Constantinople 381, and Council of Ephesus 431, and Council of Chalcedon 451. These councils basically has dealt with some of the most important aspects of Christology. Jesus Christ, the Son of God, he was not a created being, but he is, co-equal with God, and he is true God who became, man. And then about the relationship of Christ's humanity with his deity, whether it is, his humanity was real or only apparent. False doctrines came, that was also the council handled it. Then the relationship of the deity with the humanity, how the two were existing in the person of Christ. So the theanthropic personality of Christ at the one time, he is God who has assumed a human nature also. Only one person and not 2 persons. There is only one person, Christ is, with the 2 natures, not 2 persons with the 2 natures. There are 3 important personalities stands out during these periods of the councils. One of them is Ambrose, the second one is Jerome, and the third one is Augustine. Ambrose lived between 340 and 397. He was born in Western Germany. While young, he was very young, he was appointed as governor of North, Italy. And there were Arians in Italy. They're all people who denied the deity of Christ. And the Bishop of Milan died. They wanted to elect an Arian as bishop. Ambrose tried to bring order in the church. He was a bishop only at that time. No, he was the governor only at that time, not the bishop. One day the people meted to elect a new bishop. Ambrose was there as a governor to preside in the proceedings. It's interesting that while the whole people gathered in the church, a little child cried out above the uproar of the people, "Ambrose bishop, Ambrose bishop." It was then that Ambrose got into the church to bring in order, and actually then finally they have elected Ambrose as the bishop. Because they thought what the child said, it must be from God. So Ambrose was a strong supporter of Nicene Creed. So Arians were defeated there. So that's one great contribution of this man. The second man is Jerome. He was born in 340 in Dalmatia. Jerome lived, loved traveling, so he traveled extensively. He traveled the whole Roman Empire, it said. The last days of his life he spent in Bethlehem. There he lived as a monk. Jerome knew Hebrew well. He translated the Old Testament from Hebrew to Latin. The Latin Vulgate. It's the greatest contribution of Jerome, which was very widely used by actually people who knew the Latin. It was a much better translation than Septuagint, which was Hebrew translation to Greek. Septuagint was a poor translation. Our Lord and Apostles used that. It was not that it was completely wrong translation, but it was not necessarily a quality translation. So Jerome's Latin Vulgate was very much in use for those people who were there. So that's a major contribution during that time. That means Bible was in the hands of more people. That's a contribution,
The Old Testament? Or?
The Old Testament. The third contribution is by Augustine, the man. He was born in North Africa. Tertullian and Cyprian also came from Africa, but Augustine is the greatest of all church fathers. You know about Monica, Augustine's mother. She is one of the most famous mothers of church history. They say that there are only two women who stands above shoulders of all other women. One is Monica, the other is who? Wife of Luther, yes. These two women stands taller than anybody else, and their contribution cannot be forgotten. Of course, Monica's contribution is Augustine. And Augustine was very bright. At an early age, he has shown, indications that he has unusual abilities. So his parents wanted to educate him for a great position. And so they sent him when he was 16 to Carthage. Carthage was a great center of education. But Augustine messed up, in his adolescence. He messed up with women and all kinds of evil. Even at a very early age, before he becoming a young man, he already fathered a child in a woman. So he was messed up, His mother was so sad about the whole thing. So she was praying and crying, and one day she almost was despaired and wanted to give up. That's when some saintly person came and said that the son of so many prayers or tears will not be lost. The son of so many tears will not be lost. So she has taken again courage and she prayed. And Augustine turned to philosophy, and he was attracted to the Persian religion of Manichaeism, a philosophy of a man, Samaeneus, a Persian. It was a strange combination of Christianity and heathenism. For 9 years, Augustine was a practicing Manichaean. Augustine was in Rome for a year. He was appointed as professor of rhetoric and public speaking at Milan. At that time, Ambrose was the bishop of Milan, and Augustine loved listening to good preaching, and this man Ambrose was a great preacher. He used his both hands in preaching. His gestures were very famous, so he will go every Sunday to listen just to Ambrose, but he didn't care for the content of the message. He only cared for the rhetoric, the oration part of it, And shortly, Monica, his mother, joined Augustine at Milan. That's when a change was slowly happening in him. He began to see the errors of Manichaeism. He was very intelligent, therefore he asked many questions, many questions, and his questions were not answered by, Manichaean philosophers. So Augustine slowly began to turn to Bible. He turned to many other things like Pelagianism. There was no answer again. So he turned to Bible, and Augustine was told by a bishop that, once said that thousands of monks in Egypt are leading a very holy life, but they do not know how to read and write. Uneducated, illiterate monks were leading holy life. Augustine was ashamed because Augustine is very highly literate and leading a very moral life. He wanted to overcome the passions of the flesh, but he could not. That's when this bishop said that, shame on you, the thousands of monks there who cannot read and write, and they never read the Bible, but they're leading a very holy life. So Augustine decided that he wants to change. So one day he took the book of Romans and he went into a park and he sat down on a bench, and then in few minutes he was overtaken by the sorrow of his sin, So he knelt down, fell flat on the grass, and he was crying and trying to pray and all that. Then he heard a little child saying, telle lege, tole lege, which means take up and read. So he got up and took the book of Romans, and he turned and he came to Romans chapter 13 verses 3 and 4, which basically say that stop your wanton living, of drunkenness and sexual orgy and all these things. So there actually, it was there he got converted, This was the turning point in his life. It was his conversion. From that moment on. Augustine was a new creation. Augustine enrolled as a humble, catechumen. Catechumen are the beginning believers, get taught the basics for baptism, So he enrolled as a catechumen, and he was instructed by Ambrose. This happened in the summer of 386 AD. On Easter Sunday, he was baptized. Augustine became the Bishop of Hippo in North Africa very shortly. Until his death in 430, he devoted himself to serve the church. He founded the first monastery in North Africa. He defended the teachings of the church against many heresies. He avoided many divisions in the church. That was one of his great contributions. This man avoided many divisions on the basis of many doctrinal problems. He fought against three major apostasies. One is Manichaeism, the second is Donaticism, the third is Pelagianism. So the Donatists were not necessarily heretics, they did not necessarily teach any wrong doctrine, but they were divisive people. Their doctrine was orthodox, but their behavior was divisive. Anybody who did not agree with the orthodox doctrine, they wanted to throw them out of the church, So that was there. And those days there was a problem that because of severe persecution, a lot of people denied even Jesus Christ. Some of the bishops even gave away the Bibles to be burnt to the kings and the officers, And then when the persecution slowed down, these people wanted to get back to the church. But these Donatists, they resisted it. No. Once gone, always gone. You cannot. So the church was almost going to be divided. That's when Augustine stepped in and said that, you have to take them back if they repent. Repentance of any sin is a sufficient ground to take people back. So we cannot be legalists. So, these people didn't want to give them, sacraments or allow even those bishops to baptize or administer sacraments and etc. But, Augustine allowed them. So he definitely saved the church from a major division, because there were tens of thousands of people who belonged to that category, not one or two, especially in Africa. Now in Hippo, where Augustine was a bishop, there were more Donatists than Orthodox believers. Orthodox mean not the Orthodox Church, but those who believe the true doctrine, or they were also called Catholics. Against these Donatists, Augustine developed his doctrine of the church and sacraments. He taught that the true Catholic Church is the only church. To the Catholic churches, he ascribed great authority. He said, I should not have believed the gospel except as moved by the authority of the Catholic Church. That's quite a wrong statement in a sense. In this controversy against Pelagius, Augustine worked out his doctrine of man and salvation. Pelagius, from whom Pelagianism comes, denied human race had fallen in Adam. He taught that Adam's sin affected only Adam. Every child is born just like Adam was created originally. And, only man gets his body from Adam. His soul spirit is newly created by God and put in that body. So that child become a sinner only if that child sin. So, Pelagius also believed it is possible for a man to live without sinning, and he never needs Jesus Christ or anybody. He can go heaven, And of course, Pelagius even taught more things. Pelagius believed that everybody will go to heaven. He said even the devil will go to heaven after suffering for his sin. Yes, that's what he said. But Augustine taught that everyone is born a sinner, conceived in sin, and can be saved only through the grace of God, according to God's sovereign good pleasure. The controversy resulted in the Council of Ephesus in 431. where Pelagius was condemned a heretic and total depravity was accepted. In 529, the Synod of Orange condemned the teachings of semi-Pelagians. Semi-Pelagians are there still today. There are many semi-Pelagians, basically, most of the Pentecostal churches are semi-Pelagians. They believe a man is still able to do good and to, he can believe if he wants. He can stop believing if he wants. He can again believe if he wants. God's special grace need not to be there. So man is basically a man-centered thing. Not that all Pentecostals believe that, but majority of the Pentecostals believe that. And of course that is what the doctrines many other groups believe. So Augustine's teachings dominated the Roman Catholic Church in the Middle Ages. Then later came Thomas Aquinas, and then with that one, the present Roman Catholic Church, Thomas Aquinas is the father. But Augustine was the major theologian who formed the doctrines in the early Roman Catholic Church. So there's a major difference, and and of course the present Pope is teaching things even Thomas Aquinas won't accept. He's saying things, I don't know what he's going to say next. Definitely he's going to say something very foolish. He only said things foolish. Augustine's teaching dominated the Roman Catholic Church in the Middle Ages. Luther and Calvin received great inspiration from Augustine. The two most famous works of Augustine, of course, his Confession and the City of God. Confession is his personal testimony of sin and conversion. The City of God is his philosophy of history. The bishop of the Western Roman Empire were called, metropolitan bishops. If they had a large metropolis as their vicarage, means that if you are a bishop of a small city, you won't be called a metropolitan, you will simply be called a bishop. But if you come from a big city, major city, then you are not a bishop, then you are a metropolitan. That's from there. Today's metropolitan all comes from that one, There were 5 churches, among others assumed great prominence because they were in big metropolises. One was Jerusalem, the other was Antioch, third was Alexandria, and the fourth Constantinople, finally the Rome. The bishops of these metropolises were later called patriarchs. Patriarch really simply means father. They were the father bishops actually. The first 4 were in the eastern part of the Roman Empire. The last one, Rome, was in the Western Empire. Yes, all the churches held Jerusalem as the most important because church began there. There was, church before any of the other 4 churches were established. So though gradually the church in Jerusalem was eclipsed by other churches and the believers were scattered all over the world, yet because that was a mother church, its importance was never overlooked. And also the fact that, wherever Jewish people scattered, there were, Jewish Christians, and therefore they all gave the Bishop of Jerusalem the position of Patriarch. He deserved it. That's how he was addressed, Patriarch of Jerusalem. Antioch was the mother of many churches in Asia Minor and Greece. Antioch had many notable bishops, and it became the seat of an important school of theological thought. Antioch was the 3rd biggest city in size and importance in all, the Eastern Roman Empire. So the bishop of Antioch also was addressed as patriarch. The city of Alexandria was very prominent because of the famous school of theology there. It is also claimed that the church there was established by Mark, who wrote the Gospel of Mark. Origen, the greatest scholar of the church until then, was in this school of theology in Alexandria. So the bishop of Alexandria was also called patriarch. Then Constantinople was originally called, Byzantium, an ancient city situated by the Bosphorus. Constantine the Great, he felt that Rome has shed so much blood of Christians. So Rome cannot be called the capital of the Christian empire. So he moved the capital from Rome and went to this Byzantium, which was known. He changed the name to Constantinople after his own name. So Constantinople became very, very important. Especially Constantine has moved his palace also to Constantinople. And because of the proximity of the Bishop of Constantinople to Constantine, of course the bishop gained much reputation and fame. So he was considered a great patriarch. Now Rome was the first city in the empire, Roman Empire, from time it was started. So according to tradition, both Paul and Peter labored there, and the people say Peter was the first pope and the first bishop and all that thing. Therefore, he was also called, the Bishop of Rome was also called patriarch. So 5 patriarchs were there. And now whenever a controversy, there were many controversies, especially for authority. The question was always asked, who is the greatest of all these 5 patriarchs? Of course, 4 patriarchs will never accept the patriarch at Rome was unimportant, because they say that the city of Rome cannot be considered a holy city because that only killed Peter and Paul. How can that be a holy city? Antioch, they claimed, is a holy city. Why? Because Apostle Paul and all the labors of the church at Antioch, the movement of the modern mission started there and all that. Okay, Jerusalem is a holy city because that's where the church began, and Jesus Christ and all that. So the Bishop of Rome was never accepted as the most important one, even though the other 4 patriarchs will have fight all the time to decide who among them is the greatest. And whenever they had this problem, what they do? They will always go to the patriarch at Rome as a mediator. Is to decide who among the 4 is greatest. But though they will not accept him as a greater. So the patriarch at Rome actually, by these people coming to him, had some kind of a influence, but yet they would accept that influence. The influence is only when the fight is going on. Otherwise there wasn't. So whenever the controversy arose, all the bishops of the east and west will appeal to Rome to settle it. But otherwise, no reason they will accept him as the leader. Eventually, all over the Western Empire, there was nobody to challenge Rome, especially in the Western Empire. In the Eastern Empire, these 4 patriarchs are there. So the Pope actually, or eventually the Patriarch of Rome did not have any influence upon the Eastern churches. Eastern churches were basically influenced by these 4 patriarchs, but all the Western Empire was completely under the Roman bishop, and there was nobody to challenge him. So between the patriarchs of Antioch, Alexandria, Constantinople, there was a conflict of supremacy. Who is the highest of all 3? All 3 were not willing to accept supremacy of Rome. However, in their rivalry, as I said, that they will turn to Rome. However, in the western part of Roman Empire, there was no other bishop who could challenge the Bishop of Rome. As far back as 185, Irenaeus has written a book against heresies in which he has stated, a statement that the church at Rome is the most important one and all should agree with the Bishop of Rome. That statement was taken, as an indication that the Bishop of Rome was the most important. The Bishop of Rome claimed he is the father of all bishops, Papa, and therefore he must be called Pope. It was a monk called Gregory the Great who claimed all others to call him Papa. He was the first one to come and said, I am the Papa, father of all bishops, so henceforth you will call me Papa Bishop. Or, and that's how, the title Pope came. He ruled from 590 to 604 as the Pope, There arose a controversy of exalting the Bishop of Rome as Pope, and as a result, the Patriarch of Constantinople was declared equal to the Pope of Rome. The controversy became very soon so very big, so therefore the emperor has to make a settlement, said that the Patriarch of Constantinople and the Patriarch of Rome are equals. But Leo I was the Pope there at that time, but Leo was very unhappy about it, And this decision was really made at the Council of Chalcedon, therefore everybody has to accept it. But Leo was protested, but in vain, because that poor man died in 461. He did not live long enough to prove his supremacy, over the others. The last of the ancient and the first of the medieval popes was this man Leo. The last of the ancient, the first of the medieval. So we now talk about, the deterioration of the church, how the church has gone down. By the end of the 5th century, all kinds of false doctrines and practices crept into the church. For example, prayer for the dead. From somewhere came the doctrine, prayer for the dead. People wanted some comfort, so the relatives will come to these bishops and priests and say that, pray for the comfort of the soul. Then the belief in purgatory came, that nobody can go straight to heaven. For the sin and for the corruption that are still remaining, purging is necessary, so it is done in a place called purgatory. The 40-day Lenten season came again this time. The view of the Lord's Supper as a sacrifice came during this period. The unique position of the priest with the power to forgive sins and all that came. Division of the church to clergy and laity, laymen and clergy, priest, that came during this time. The veneration of martyrs and saints came during this time. The adoration of Mary came during this time. The burning of candles and incense in the honor of Mary and other saints came during this time. The veneration of relics came this time. Ascription of magical powers to the relics began to come into. Pictures, images and altars in the churches were made this time. And gorgeous vestments for clergy, very colorful vestment for clergy, elaborate and splendid rituals of worship, and all these things, came. And also pilgrimage to holy places, monasticism, worldliness, persecution of heathen and those who oppose the church, to the extent of killing them. All these things came during this time. The last part of the last part of the ancient and the first part of the medieval, that period about, you say 100 years, a lot of things begin to come, lot of things.
Was it different in the Western from the Eastern that time?
The Eastern churches were not as polluted as the Western churches. Yeah, the Eastern churches held on to things. The thing about the Eastern church was, the problems that plagued the Eastern churches were more of theology than about, these are all practices. Eastern church was not plagued by very much of practices like that. Only slowly they learned it from the Western churches. Eastern churches still had problem about, for example, the hypostatic union of Christ, whether Christ was two persons, one nature or two natures in one, that's sort of Nestorianism, and all these kinds of theological problems were there. But the prayer for the dead and all these things in purgatory and all did not. They all came mostly from the Western part. Of course, when people were doing this one, still it is, though the empire was divided into two and the patriarchs were different, but still the people were having interpersonal relationships. So when these